Hi, everybody. It's great to be back. I love coming to Porto. I like coming to Portugal, but I like coming to Porto more. I've always enjoyed my visits here. This is a little ringy. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my own background. I went to Stanford in the early days, a center called Karma, apt name for a California research center. We all had the Karma. Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. I studied with John Chowning, inventor of FM, as many of you know, and Leland Smith, who you probably don't know, wrote the first comprehensive music notation system, it's a motorcycle, entitled MS, or originally called SCORE, and it was adopted by major publishing houses, including Ricordi and Schott, which are, those of you who buy music know that these are two of the biggest publishers in Europe. And he actually wrote this program by hand in Fortran over, I don't know how many years. I sat beside him in the AI labs at Stanford for my whole time there, and he was coding, and I actually produced the first large-scale thesis and with parts generated from that product in 1976. No, wrong, 78, 2 years later. But think about it, 1978, there was a software system for notation and parts production. How long has it taken for us to have those in our fingertips? Quite a while. So Chowning and Smith were really key players at Stanford. My first job was at Queen's University in Canada, where I was hired by the School of Music, and my first position was at Queen's. Queen's University is halfway between Toronto and Montreal, at the beginning of the St. Lawrence River. It's a really beautiful ancient town, ancient by North American standards. It was actually the first capital of Canada before it moved to Ottawa, and the music department was small and had no graduate school, so my graduate students were all in computer science, and my first computer music journal article was published there. After several years at Queen's, I was invited to go to McGill University in Montreal, where I founded the Music, Media, and Technology program, which also became something called CERMIT, the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Music, Media, and Technology. The last, not the current chair, but the previous chair was music psychologist Stephen McAdams, and it's closely related with the Montreal Neurological Institute, a huge project called Brahms, Brain Research and Music Science, with Daniel Levitan, who some of you may have known this book called This Is Our Brain on Music, very famous book, and even made New York Times. He was hired while I was still there, and as part of this whole music science and neuroscience group at McGill, which is very impressive right at the moment. However, at the moment, for the past 10 years, I've been at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, and I hold a dual appointment in music and radio, television, film, and chair the undergraduate media arts program. So what else do I do? Composer, electroacoustic, and acoustic music. We're going to hear a piece shortly. Developed lots of software and bits and pieces of hardware primarily for music performance. I've published a number of papers that would be largely called machine-assisted music analysis or music performance, and lots of other articles on music technology and aesthetics and what have you. The talk now is basically an update of this chapter in this book, Digital Media, Technological and Social Challenges of the Interactive World, published last year by Scarecrow Press in New York. And the chapter that I have is called The Impact of New Media on Music Creativity. So that's really what we're doing here. So what is this? Anybody ever see one of these before? Yeah? Tell me what it does. Somebody.
Jackpot.
Huh?
Jackpot.
Yeah. And what do you do with it?
It's a system to control systems in kind of concept, so digital concept.
Yeah, it's a data card. It's a data card. But it's more than that. In the earliest days of mainframe computing, the only way to program the machine was that. Every line of code is a card, a card. So you can imagine you have these boxfuls of Hollerith cards named after the IBM guy, Hollerith. And to make music meant you need, first of all, some software that would run on an IBM mainframe, which we had a program called Perform, which was a kind of mini version of a Bell Labs program. And my very first piece, I had to key punch these cards, describing waveforms, envelopes, pitches, sound connections, everything that had to happen in the piece had to be done one card at a time. Anybody here know C-Sound? C-Sound is a descendant of Music 360, IBM 360, and the .sco, the score part of Music 360, is effectively what each line of that would be a card.
Okay.
All right? Horrible. So I take my box of cards and wait in line, because in those days, of course, mainframes were one job at a time. They were sequential and not multi-parallel in any way. So you wait in line, somebody takes your cards, stuffs them into the card reader, it goes and read into the machine, at which point you learn you have about 20 errors. So you go back to the card punch, take your box. Finally, the machine says, okay, this is a legal program, I'll run it tomorrow. And so you wait till tomorrow, and you go back to the engineering center. Didn't work. Didn't run. Why? Who knows? So you go back. Eventually, it'll run, and it's turned into data on, audio signal data on a mag tape, which was the old-fashioned, I love in sci-fi movies in the 60s, every computer room were really the tape drive rooms. They had nothing to do with the computer. It was all the tape drives going chuck, 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 chuck. So we take that tape to another lab that would convert that tape from IBM format, 9-track, to DEC format, 7-track, which could then be played on a DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, PDP 10, actually we didn't have a 10, we had a little one, and finally converted to sound. After 2 weeks, you heard, these horrible noises. It would be a little bit like walking up to a piano, playing a chord, and 2 weeks later hearing and realizing you played a wrong note. Now, imagine making music that way. That's how the earliest computer music pieces were made. So what I did at University of Toronto when I was a student there, before I went to Stanford, was convert this system to at least an interactive terminal where you could type on a terminal and all these cards instead of having, and make a file instead of having to actually card punch. But you still had to wait for all the other stuff. So giving that talk to my digital media class at University of Texas with all the bright young 18, 19, 20-year-olds was a total flop because they had no clue what I was talking about. They could not conceive that it would be possible that that's how you would use a computer. It was just completely inconceivable. But I'm telling you, that's how it worked. So what we're going to explore now are 3 key things: user interface, access to processes, which is the second element that I think is critical, and the third one is capacity to reiterate processes. Those are the 3 things that have radically changed not only music software, but all software, but especially creative software. Everybody knows that iteration is imperative. Imagine, again, nobody here ever did this, but typing your term paper at a typewriter. Anybody do this? No, of course not. And I didn't either. I hired people to do it because I was terrible at typing. And how do you add a paragraph? Let's see, page 4, oh, I need another paragraph. Well, pages 4 through 27 are now useless because there's nowhere to stuff the extra paragraph. And that simple piece of iteration, being able to go back and change things, really changed how we write, for sure, but also how we write music. And I'm seeing this with my students. We'll come to all of that eventually. The classic question, what is new media or digital media? And this is the best definition I ever found. It's from the Digital Media Alliance, Florida, an alliance of government, education, and businesses. And I like the part that they connect digital arts, science, technology, business, human expression, social interaction. They really bring everything together into all the things we do. And it's not, I'll put it another way, it's important to note that they call this the creative convergence of all of these things. And building software, building good software for anything is an extremely creative process. You're inventing new ways to work, in effect. Like what the spreadsheet did for accounting. It was unthinkable to manage money without a spreadsheet today. It's just completely unthinkable. What is not digital media? We might say, well, cars aren't. Well, think again. That's the surface on the new Toyota. It's a full LED display system, the whole car. So you can put your Facebook movies on the car as you're driving. Or, obviously for advertisers, they're going to put their product movies on the car. Now, this is worth looking at. If you go to Toyota, you can see this stuff. And they have some movie clips of it actually change, the surface changing. And inside you just take your whatever iTunes device and play a movie. Play. It plays all over your car. So everything's, I guess, digital media. But let's look at some history. These are all kind of major points of departure. Moog synthesizers, Chowning's FM, Bukla's innovative products, we're still building them. The language known as Music 5, which is the parent of all modern computer music languages, descendant of, I picked C Sound as one of the descendants because it has become a public domain sound synthesis language used all over the world, taught in multiple languages. It's a community-supported language, which makes it an open source developmental platform. And as archaic as its architecture is and structure, it's really based on, in fact, I'll be really precise, not assembly code exactly, but what we call macro assembler code. That it still looks like that, and it always will. Operand, operand, operator. It's really old-fashioned, but it works. And it works in real time now and makes lots of sound. So C-Sound and its derivatives are public domain. And then, of course, Max MSP and the public one of that called PD from Miller Puckett and David Ziccarelli. So this is an incredible machine. I used these. We had one at McGill, and there was one at Colgate, where I used to work, Colgate University. I spent my summers for a while. And there are still a few of these around. They fetch incredible prices on eBay right now. Tens of thousands of dollars for a vintage Moog 100. The Chowning FM, anybody have one of these still, a DX7? Carlos, you still have one? I do.
Never had one.
Yeah. This is the original one. This changed how everybody used digital audio, this machine. First of all, it was one of the earliest to have MIDI capability. And MIDI was a very interesting history. We won't go into it right now, but an agreement among manufacturers to standardize the protocol of performance. This is a performance protocol, meaning if I touch this key, what does that mean? It means that a value representing C4, middle C, will be transmitted for as long as that key is down and not transmitted when you release the key. That is the essence of MIDI. It doesn't know about time, it doesn't know about anything. It's a control system for live performance. Why? Because groups like Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, you see these photographs of them playing with, 27 keyboards in a rack. Well, you get rid of the rack by normalizing the keyboard, by making the keyboard a way of sending a message to all of those things. And that's what MIDI is. All the rest of it came later. It was really about performance. And they added things like tone wheels where you could have continuous control, volume control. They were all performance parameters. We've turned MIDI into lots more than that. You control mixers with it and all kinds of things, but that's not where it came from. So the nice part about that history is that the only company that didn't agree to join was ARP, A-R-P, another major synthesizer company of the day. And where are they? Bye-bye. They didn't make it because they'd never agreed on the protocol. Whereas Casio, Yamaha, what's the other big one? Roland. Yeah, all agreed to MIDI protocol. And we know what became of all of those. Buchla was a fascinating creator. We'll go back to creative technology, business, music. Remember the list from that Florida quote? Buchla typifies that whole list. He knew how to run a business. He knew how to make things. He knew how to create things. He knew how to be musical. The Lightning III is still a remarkable tool. You have this receiver and two wands that are basically radio emitters, transmitters, and very precise control. But the Marimba Lumina, this lower picture here, is his latest performance surface for mallets. There was a previous iteration of this called a Malacat, which had kind of these rubbery surfaces and wasn't great. It was okay. But the Marimba Lumina is really something. In fact, I used this recently in a piece, so I'm going to play a little clip. This piece is called For Joe Z. It's a piece I wrote as an homage to Joseph Zawinul, the keyboard player from Weather Report, who died, well, some years ago. And I wrote a piece for the Paul Drescher Electroacoustic Band in San Francisco. And this is from a live performance in San Francisco with Joel Dabell playing the Marimba Lumina, who not only is a percussionist performer, but he works for Donald Buchla. So What does he do? He makes circuit diagrams of all things. AutoCAD. Don't ask. So here's a little clip. From there, he was actually rubbing to go, you rub the keys so you can play them and then leave the mallet on and get these extra tones. So it's a nice performance space. Here's another modern piece of hardware which both of our studios, Philip and mine, use, where the metaphor of the mixing board becomes a piece of software. And here we have a controller that doesn't look anything like a keyboard, because it isn't. It's a controller that is an analog of a mixing surface. There's no sound inside this. All it does is send signals over Ethernet, in fact, very high-speed Ethernet. Earlier times I built hardware to make things. This was a device called the MIDI time clip that I built that would clip on a music stand, and you could send messages and beats pulsing on this big LED lamp to the performer so they could know visually exactly where they were in a complex piece, including running time counts or measures in bars or beats or whatever text you wanted to send could be displayed on these 6 LED lamps, including SMPTE time code for connection with video. And nobody wanted to build it and sell it, so that was the end of that. We talk about graphics. This is a modern graphic notation system, Sibelius. Some of you probably use it, or Finale. The integration of editable notation and playback was a major change in how people write music. Absolutely major change, watershed. We have students applying as undergraduates at the University of Texas in composition. We don't really take very many undergraduate composition students. This year we had a large number of applicants, and they're submitting complete orchestra scores, fully, beautifully, perfectly notated. I don't think it was even possible to do that 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. Who could learn the intricacies of notation in a large score, 24 staves plus, in high school? I mean, yeah, there might have been a few people who could do this. But today, everybody who studies music in high school in the US is fluent with these pieces of software. They're writing band pieces, giant pieces for wind ensemble, marching band, musicals, orchestral scores, string quartets. Now, do they know what a string quartet really sounds like? No. They haven't learned all that. They do know that Sibelius won't let them put that note there because it's too high for the bassoon. Sibelius warns them, sorry, out of range. But I think if you grab one of these 18-year-olds and said, tell me the range of a contrabassoon, they would not know. And many of the scores show absolutely incorrect comprehension of how instruments actually work. So they've gained, on one hand, the ability to produce notation and listen to it, except they've skipped over having to learn about all the stuff that you need to know to actually make that work correctly. So we've gained a big deal here and lost some other things. So yes, of course, over 4, 5, 6 years of composition study, they'll know how an oboe works, hopefully. But you don't really need to know to use this stuff. You really don't. Is that good or bad? Well, let's look at this graphical notation of the same data called piano roll notation. Piano roll notation was the earliest MIDI notation, not so much music graphics, although they were around but clumsy. But piano roll notation is really the ideal format for MIDI because it's a time pitch graph, period. That's what it is, time pitch graph. And aptly called piano roll from the piano rolls, the original piano rolls. Anybody ever seen a piano roll player, play a piano with a real piano roll in it? Anybody? They're fabulous. There are composers like Nankao who explored piano rolls, but early American performers like Gottschalk and a lot of the New Orleans players made piano rolls manually. So there was a recorder piano that punched holes. So you had to order the recording version of the piano. It punched holes, and then the companies reproduced these piano rolls and sold them. These were marketable. These were product. To who? Well, a lot of bars owned a player piano, so you could hear, you know, Scott Joplin ragtimes played on the piano. Live, so to speak. Very interesting that technology became this representation, the MIDI track representation. Very interesting. Of course, there's so much more you can do. You can go in and edit every single little script here and change its velocity and its length and it's this and it's that. Much more easily than you can repunch a piano roll. That's the same thing as the typewriter versus the word processor. It's a nuisance to fix typed manuscript or handwritten manuscript. Not so much. You just go edit, save, edit, save, edit, save, listen, edit, save, listen, edit, save, till you're done. So this reiteration. But now in here, we also have access to enormously powerful processes. For example, humanize. What does humanize mean in logic? Well, humanize means in logic something that Leland Smith, who I mentioned from Stanford, figured out a long time ago in his music score generating software, not just the notation, but also the data ones, that by dithering or wiggling the onset times and introducing an error, let's say this is exactly metronome clock, metronome clock, metronome clock, you introduce a small fraction of error around each clock point, plus minus, and it sounds much more human. Well, because we cannot play exactly clock, 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 thankfully. That's one of the reasons MIDI-generated music sounds horrible, is the precision of the rhythms. You have to introduce error to make it sound rational. So that's a kind of process that is available there. It's also available in Sibelius. There are many processes to help the composer. For example, I would like the retrograde transposition, retrograde inversion transposed +4 semitones. Done. Because there's a function that does that. There's a function that does practically everything. And there are all kinds of additional plugins. So not only can we reiterate the process of doing, we can add computational processes to that work. In the same way that in Word you might use the grammar checker. It's a process. Then there's this metaphor, a recording studio metaphor. Again, processes. How do we reiterate or iterate the process with this? We automate it. We draw lines. Where do we draw them? There. We draw lines in the automation here, automation of dynamics and everything else. And that controls our faders. Or we go get one of these and control the faders with that and record those gestures as data. So everything's looking like recordable, editable, processable data. It's all data. Here's another form of data in effect, MaxMSP, which presents the metaphor of these things, patch chords. In fact, the earliest version of this from IRCAM was called Patchworks. That was the first name for this kind of software. And what do? Well, the black lines are passing of control data, values, numbers, and in this case, the yellow dotted lines are signals, audio signals being routed around like patch chords. So not only can we route patch chords of audio, we can route patch chords of numbers. And technically it's called a data flow language and a VI, a visual interface. There are many visual interface languages that computer scientists have tried to build over the years. Everybody ends up writing C++ at the end of the day. Why? That's another talk. But this is a music making tool. Music and sound. And of course, if you know more about it, it includes images using the component called jitter, which processes video signals. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit about the role of technology in music research. I want to refer to the project that I've been working on with Carlos and others here, George and Gilberto and Eduardo, and a large group, called Kinetic Control Driven Adaptive and Dynamic Music Systems. This was a 4-year project that produced a number of interesting outputs, especially Rui's Gimme the Blues application, which we'll get to momentarily. But I just wanted to show it as, this is MaxMSP program, sort of modern looking Max program with an interface. This is a program I wrote to test another program, the output of another program. And you can see you can write programs with, you know, buttons and numbers and triggers and values. It is a very powerful graphic interface. And behind all of that are the things doing the work, the processes. So this screen you're seeing is a different representation of music and audio. So now we have score, we have all these representations. And they're all graphic representations of essentially the same stuff, but being used in different ways. Let's talk a little bit about listening. Thaddeus Cahill, this is a great story. The telharmonium was a device built in the late 1800s in New York, in the telephone company's main building, that was an enormous room full of dynamos. A dynamo is an electric device that spins, basically. Well, turned out that if you spin them at the right speed, you can get particular pitches. And they produce are in effect giant sine wave oscillators. A sine wave that we think of as this is actually circular motion. It's periodic circles. So he built this giant machine and pumped, quote, respectable music into homes and apartments in New York City. By respectable, that would mean, keyboard music and what have you, and not those terrible songs from the dance halls. And it was subscribed by New York City telephone subscribers and came to your telephone as audio, as sound. It wasn't converted at your telephone to sound, it was sent to you as sound. Fascinating. This is what it looked. This is a picture. There aren't so many pictures of it. These two guys. These are at the keyboard, and the room would be the size of a huge factory floor, with these massive dynamos generating tones and pumping them out with a telephone system. And the idea was that you would subscribe to it and pay for it on a per tune basis. Ever heard of that? Pay per tune? And it was in the Telharmonic Hall on 39th and Broadway, and actually functioned for some 20 years. Unbelievable. He never made a dime with this thing. As soon as radio was invented in 1927, sayonara. Because all you needed now was a radio receiver. Forget the telephone. Right? And you could transmit over radio from any broadcast studio. Remember, radio initially was all live. Everything was live on radio. So this leads to an interesting list. We have the telharmonium sort of dying out in the early 1900s. The same technology produced in miniature the Hammond organ. The Hammond organ is a keyboard machine with sine wave oscillators. Literally spinning oscillators in the original Hammond. Mechanical oscillators. And then in the 50s, the appearance of Muzak. What is Muzak? Muzak's the stuff that is pumped into the grocery store, or the shopping mall, or the restaurant, or the hair salon. It was the beginning of this intrusion of music into every public space that we go into, and was invented by a guy named Major General Owen Squire, who was a World War II communications Army expert, radio, obviously. And his Muzak was really the first subscriber model. So now we have not only the mechanics to have listening everywhere, but a model to sell music, very particular kinds of music, to very particular clients, the subscriber model. There were even, in their advertising from the 50s, they even talk about selling to farmers specific playlists so their cows would be happy. They thought for sure that they had a behavioral tool of all times here. And if you were in an office building in the 60s, the music would start to pick up just before coffee break to kind of get people a little more, working a little faster, and then after coffee break to lunch, there would be another cycle of increased tempo and increased activity. It was all laid out as a behavioral tool to keep your employees productive, or to put you in the mood to buy, I don't know, lamb chops or something in the grocery store. I mean, who knows? I mean, there was some correlation in these playlists, or supposed or presumed correlation to behavior and the playlists. Everybody knows that when you go into a mall and you hear, there's a jeans store right around the corner, right? Absolutely guaranteed. So we aren't very far from this notion that specific kinds of music are associated with specific products. And that's what Muzak was all about, was connecting a musical experience, listening, to buying. Well, Sony Walkman, 79. The story of the Sony Walkman is equally fascinating. The president of Sony at that time was a pilot as well, and he had to fly frequently from Tokyo to LA, and he wanted a device that could play one opera long. He was an opera aficionado. And the Walkman, cassette Walkman, was produced for him. And it became everywhere. The Walkman was everywhere. Everybody had a Walkman. And then there was the Discman, the CD version. But the Walkman played cassette tapes. Who even owns a cassette tape anymore? I have boxfuls of them from research, and my wife's research is all on cassette tape. But, it was incredible. Here you had a battery-powered, high-fidelity audio player with tons of music on it. And all you needed were headphones. That model is where we are today. Better technology, but it's still the same model. Portable and headphones. Where did we get there? Karl-Heinz Brandenburg at the Fraunhofer Institute in Nuremberg invented MP3. I had the pleasure of hearing MP3 in his acoustic chamber before it was released to the public. I was shocked at how good the bit compression was. It's much better now. We now have lossless compression. That was, MP3 is lossy. But that codec changed everything, right? The earliest lawsuits about music ownership were based on this, MP3. MP3.com. Anybody ever go to that site? It existed. It was taken off. And suddenly, with all the shared sites, there was free music everywhere. What made the difference? The difference was that fully encoded, unencoded audio was too long, too many bits to ship around conveniently. So the compression ratio was roughly 10 to 1 in MP3. That meant that your 3-minute song was compressed to 1/10 of that. 180 seconds down to the equivalent of 18 seconds. But more to the point, the total number of bits were compressed down to more than 10 to 1 in the low-end cases, which meant that sharing music over the internet was solved. And what was music to most people who wanted to share it? Songs that were under 3 minutes. Why are radio songs 3 minutes? Anybody know that history? It's fascinating. For one thing, the 78 RPM record had a maximum time of roughly 3 minutes. And somehow the advertisers decided that you couldn't wait longer than 3 minutes to have another ad play. That's why all the classical stations remained sort of public, and the pop music ones with all the ads. Anyway, that's a different story. So we get to Apple, iPod, iTunes, We have all three of everything we've been talking about. Portability, volume, subscriber model, they solved all of it. I have a Nano, it's this tiny little thing. It's ridiculous. And the shuffle, these tiny little playback devices. And the quality is spectacular. So what year did all that happen? Well, that's 2000, 2005. So, well, just to finish them, this whole journey from Cahill, to the Telharmonium, to the Nano shuffle, always on music no matter where you go, took a long time, took about 100 years. But now we have exactly that. We have a full subscriber model, total portability, total access through the internet, and playback, personal playback everywhere, whenever. So you can't, it's hard to even imagine living in a world where some sort of music isn't playing or isn't immediately available. I find it quite troubling, actually, that my students at UT and all, everybody here is saying, are reading their telephone and listening to music constantly. So another part of the technology that is changing music listening and acquisition is what's going on with internet software in general, having to do with user preferences. If you bought X, you may wish to consider Y. This is the Amazon thing, right? Oh, other customers bought this, this, and this. You just bought, a whatever for your house. Now you need this, this, and this. And I'm hopeless. I click on all of them. Buy it, buy it. I have the buy with one click button. So accessing music isn't a problem. You can get stuff easily. But how do you choose what to get? That's become the bigger problem. In the same way that choosing the product, you go to buy, I was looking at handheld GPSs the other day. There are thousands of them. So what am I doing? I'm on Amazon, I'm reading the reviews, I'm comparing them, I'm looking to see which features I want. Well, how do we do that with music? Well, we read the reviews, but we'd actually like software to help us do that. And that's what people are working on very hard. So automatic identification of audio segments. That's the music information retrieval world, which has some impact on copyright as well. Is this taken from that song? Do we have a copyright infringement? But it also is a way of helping find stuff that's identical or similar. Comparisonics has this fine sounds palette process that was first used in the film editing, sound for film editing world. I want a rooster, but not that one. I want one that's older or something. I need an older rooster. Well, what do you do with a sound database of hundreds of thousands of clips, which is what the audio databases for movie editing are now? You would like a tool that can tell the difference between a young and an old rooster and has pre-cataloged that for you. And that's what people are working on. But for popular music, well, before we get there, there's an iPod. The iPod has an announcer function. Anybody use this on their iPod, the announcer? It's really annoying. It reads the metadata and tells you what the tune is. Well, if you're out jogging with a shuffle, you don't know what the hell's going to be played next, and you can't remember because you have 10,000 songs. How would you know what it is? Fortunately, in most pop music, they sing the title 300 times in the song. That's helpful, but it's not really a solution. So Pandora is another choice. Anybody have Pandora on their computer? How does Pandora work?
It's not working in Europe.
It doesn't, oh, that's true. It doesn't run
We're
over.
working with
Pandora's fascinating. They call it the Music Genome Project. They have a database where they hire essentially music theory slaves. And these slaves sit in a room and using metadata, meaning the data about data in the header of all the XML files, they type in music theory terms. Tempo, brightness, phrase lengths. They actually analyze these pop songs and give them code words from music theory to explain and describe and group and classify songs. So it isn't audio analysis. Pandora is not audio analysis. It's metadata typed by slaves. I tried it. I wanted something like Herbie Hancock, but I got Biohazard. I didn't think it was a good match. And you know why? Because they don't know who Herbie Hancock is. That's another problem, is that of the entire universe of music that we would like to listen to, only this little thin slice is being touched by any of these programs, meaning sellable pop music and some movie music. Another one, Robert Rowe's going to tell you all about source tone next week. So I won't get into it, but this is much more interesting, this concept of emotional space, where they went and actually had, I don't know, some 100 Harvard Medical School students personally describe the emotional state of hundreds of tunes. And thereby they built a matrix of likeness through emotional space. It has some boundaries, I'll let Robert tell you. So all of these things, oh, what happened here? Yes, okay. This isn't quite right. Yes, it's fine. All of these technologies have changed how we work. We now have music that is, as musicians, we now have music that is presumably similar by emotion. And programs that will help you compose music to match that. You can actually get tools, processes. I want something sad. Okay, so they put it in a minor key and make it slow. Who would have thought of that? Other impact on work. The technology on commercial music, staggering. Recording studios, there are actually fewer and fewer professional recording studios today than there were in the heyday of rock and roll in the 70s and 80s. Why? Well, because more and more people have the technology like this and this and everything I showed you to do it at home. We've become an indie world. Indie music, indie films, indie everything, independent everything. Because you can. And in fact, the music software is so good, and the music tools are so good, that other than the physical space, which is still a limiter on how well you can record, you can buy a microphone as good as a $5,000 Neumann, almost, for $150. So why buy the Neumann? Nobody will hear it, especially when you bit compress it to MP3. So this whole notion that you can do it yourself is a huge part of what's going on right now. Huge part. Film scores. Oh, and then this kind of gear. Here's the whole DJ, VJ thing. This is a DJ surface for CDs, so you can scrub CDs. Well, the whole idea of scrubbing was that you know, kind of drag the needle over things, but you can scrub CDs, but it's fully portable with backers. You can walk around in the dance floor and DJ. Here's a great one about how good software is. Mixmeister Fusion frees you from monotonous tasks like beat matching, setting cue points, and counting beats in your head. God, you wouldn't have to do that, musicians, would you? This is an ad for a mix tool. So you don't really need to know how many beats or whatever. It'll work it all out for you. GarageBand. Apple's not out of this either. Magic GarageBand, these new functions that are in GarageBand that automatically generate output. All of the loop tools, all of the drum surface tools. So the film business is the same. The intent is to build software that'll help film composers make appropriate music dynamically and from libraries of massive amounts of sound. Just for fun, in your spare time, look up royalty-free music. Just do a Google search on royalty-free music. There are hundreds of sites. And how do you get this stuff? Well, you pay a one-time fee called a buyout, and you now have the right to reproduce that music in your film anywhere. How much is that fee? 3 minutes, $20. So the currency and value of the music making is down to about, you know, like buying Coca-Cola. Anyway, I want to play one little clip here because there's a kind of music making for cartoons, that's why I have my pen, that is so unique to cartoons that about how composers work in this media domain that I have to listen to the orchestra.
Are you guys starving? Because I am absolutely cramping. Berries! Oops. Too high. I'm down here.
Well, it's going to be hard to do that by machines. Cartoons are the perfect test of composers and composing sync to picture. This what we call Mickey Mousing for obvious reasons. This is Tom and Jerrying, but still, I think it's a great example of the technology of composing with media and using the orchestra as not an orchestra at all, but as a sound source, in effect. Well, with really, really high-end sample libraries, the modern versions of these cartoons, it's exactly what people are doing, but they're doing it at home. They're not hiring an orchestra. They're doing it with sample libraries and software like we've been talking about. Because you can lock right to picture all of these little gestures precisely in your own studio, with your own software, with your own samples. So how does that look like? An 8-hour orchestra section, 60-piece orchestra, 40 minutes of music, musician, conductor, plus copyist. Copyist was a huge part of the fees in the history of film music. Huge part. Somebody had to take that score and hand write all the parts. Well, we don't do that anymore. The recording costs, a good studio, a film grade studio, $400 an hour, maybe more, with the engineer. Editing and mixing and mastering. But you could build a studio for $30,000, $40,000, one-time cost. Composer fees are not in the equation, but generally the composers are the owners of the project studios. Re-record. The cost of re-record was an inhibitor. A scene gets recut. This is very common in film. Recut, recut, recut. Oh, but the music doesn't fit anymore. We have to bring in the whole orchestra. No, what would happen is the music editor would just chop things. But the worst case is they would have to re-record. So all of this process of re-recording and refitting, or taking a bar out, or taking, making it faster to fit the shortened scene, is trivial now. Trivial. So you can build a studio once for $40,000, or your director, or give a bill to your director for $100,000 for one 8-hour session. What do you think the director and producer is going to say? Well, in the feature films, they will pay for orchestras, and they do. There's no doubt that Howard Shore's spectacular film for the Ring trilogy is. Lord of the Ring trilogy, not Wagner Ring, is really spectacular, beautiful performance. But you listen to TV carefully, there's barely a live player left on TV. All samples. And all B films, samples. And the samples are getting better, the software is getting better, the recording, the audio quality of produced results are getting better. But wait, there's cheaper still. Royalty free. Why write anything? Just go get royalty free music. And that's what the industrial film business is doing. People who make what are industrial films? Well, they're films that are used for product presentation, used for training. There are all kinds of reasons. So a company Shell Oil will have its annual convention, and there'll be films made that are shown inside to employees. There's a big market in industrial films. They're not hiring musicians, for sure. They were. But wait, there's cheaper still. That's the tech part there. Just rip it off. I've seen so many films with downloaded music that nobody declares ownership of or anything, nobody cares. So what is the value of music after all this technology got added? The bands in Austin. Austin's the live music capital of the world, so they say. I call it the live country singer-songwriters who don't get paid capital music of the world. Because these people play in bars, they don't get paid to play in the bars. They get paid to show their music. No, they play in order to do so. They don't get paid. Who makes money from CDs? Nobody makes money from CDs except, the very, very top of the food chain. So how are they making money? The only real money in the pop business now is concert tours. That's where the money is. And if you have a zillion hit CD that everybody has to own, but there's so few of those. Why? Because everybody can get what they want free from the internet. Why would they buy a CD? I ask my students in digital media class every year, how many of you bought a CD this year? No hands, of course. How many of you bought a DVD this year? There used to be a few hands. A movie. No hands. How many of you bought the software you're using this year? No hands. Where did they get that? Crack codes. I had a student say to me, if I could steal a Corvette and get away with it, I would. Meaning, what's the impact of doing this? Zero. Zero. We all get away with it. And the value of music, has no currency practically. It is devalued almost to zero as a product. Yes, there are still unions, yes, there are still contracts, yes, there are this and that, but it's tiny compared to the 70s, 60s. Broadway shows. What do they do in Broadway shows? There's not even a pit anymore. There's a band up in a room playing their instruments in shorts and t-shirts that is piped into the hall. The conductor has two-way video to where the band is. And what's to keep them from playing CDs? Well, timing. What's to keep us from solving that problem technologically? Nothing. The singers have to be in sync. That's it. Well, let's find a tool. We'll build a tool. You can just hit the CD, guaranteed sync with his baton, her baton, whatever. Yeah? It's doable. Just rip it off. Another area, we're coming to the end here before a little 10-minute piece. There's a whole study of this called The Cult of the Amateur. This book raised a lot of hackles recently, where Andrew Keene, the author, complained that the YouTube and Vimeo and all of these open publishing sites are degrading culture because there's just this trillion, servers full of crap. And some of that's true. You can find a download, an illegal download of practically anything. You can find a horrible performance of practically any piece of music. You can also find good ones. I was looking for some violin sonata the other day. I found some high school kid playing. It was like this horrible recording, all distorted and terrible playing, and the piano sounded like it was bought in 1803. And I just couldn't understand why this kid would put this video up. Well, it was their recital. It was horrible. There it was. So, I don't know. On the other hand, we don't really care. Can you compare, the singing quality of Bob Dylan to some metropolitan opera star? Of course not. It's immaterial. It's irrelevant. It's a non-comparison. So amateur versus professional probably isn't the right word. But there's certainly a quality knob that goes now below zero, I think. It goes to -5. This is a good one from Yahoo. Here's a guy who wanted to learn how to remix songs. Just read this. This is an actual Yahoo, Ask Yahoo. This is an actual transcript that I ripped off the internet. Nice language, too. This is where we are. Music and technology. New genres. Interactive controllers and all that. You've all seen some of this Wii stuff. Apps for your music, autoplay apps for the iPod. We have laptop orchestras at every major college in the US practically. They're absolutely excruciatingly horrible, in my opinion. We have very cool new apps. This This is a slide from you guys. I copped. And it's fun to play. And it's very clever technology, and a lot of thinking went into this. A lot of thinking to make it behave as some kind of tool, toy, game, interactive experience that does something pleasurable, which it does. So why music? I'll go right back to telephony. There's been more research in telephony and speech than, well, I'll put it a different way. The reason music's ahead of everything else, or has had so much effort, is because of telephony and speech. Bell Labs, the source of most of what we know today, came from Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Why? They wanted to fire operators. The gals who did this with the switching. And they wanted to fire people who go, please hold, would you like this? Now it's all computers, all of it. It's a way of reducing costs, getting rid of personnel, automating. Secondly, audio and music have a profound numerical basis that anybody who's studied any music theory is aware of. There's kind of an attraction with the mathematical and formalism of music. It's very hard to think about an equivalent formalism of theory of film. It doesn't exist. There's no scale system that you can manipulate. There's no chord structure you can change with an algorithm. There's all this numerical stuff. At one time, the magic scenario, Zarlino, the theorist from 1300s, recognized that the number 6 was important, and there's all this study of the magic scenario of 6. And also that bandwidth and storage was easier to solve for audio than video. Compression rates worked better. M4A is pretty good for video, but we want HD, and HD is a lot of bits. Whereas lossless M4A or AAC and all the formats that music uses sound fabulous. Bit-reduced video doesn't look fabulous. It's just a reality. And also, it's something culturally imperative. We're driven to have music all the time. We don't watch a movie all day. We don't walk around with, these little Nikon viewers. You can buy a glass with HD screens in them now. But I don't think they're going to work. They're not going to be the equivalent of earbuds. There won't be the equivalent of earbuds. Because we don't want to see things all the time. We live in a visual world. We walk around. We need to look. But somehow we can listen all the time. And it's become this cultural imperative that every teenager is listening to music from the second they wake up till they fall asleep. It's inexplicable. Anyway, let's listen to some Gilberto. Come and play. Well, I hope some of that makes you think about a few things anyway. That's what the book chapter's about, but I've added a lot since then. And I just think it's astonishing where this technology has brought music making in such a short time. All right. So this piece, Dark Ethers, Bright Lights, was commissioned by a woman named Shirley Diamond. It's for soprano saxophone and Max MSP audio software. The one thing about this piece that makes it a little bit scary to play is that the commissioner, this is a performance issue, the commissioner said, I cannot use foot pedals. Okay. So somehow I had to devise a system that sent messages to the software at the appropriate time. Do this now, do this now, do this now, which is how it all works. That come from a combination of the pitches that Gilberto was playing, the amount of time that has elapsed since the last time, in actual milliseconds or seconds, and also the number of notes that have been played since the last one. So there are a lot of things checking to make sure that we're in the right place at the right time, so that the player can just stand up and play without having to think about pedals and triggers or anything. So we'll see if it works. It usually works. Yeah, you're right. everybody. Yeah. Thank you. That's a really hard piece. We had one tiny little hang up there. You know what it is? Part of it, acoustics play a huge role. There was, I think it was a reflection from the saxophone to the microphone to the speakers and back that confused the software temporarily. And controlling the physical space and all of that at once is really hard to do.
It was sounding beautiful though.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So we're done.